Hi everyone, I'm going to be trying a new kind of video idea today. This style of video is going to be a lot more off the cuff than a lot of the other videos are. If you're not a big fan of that, don't worry, we'll be back to the normal history stuff next week. So if you like speedrunning, stick around, maybe I can show you some new stuff about Hearthstone speedrunning. If not, feel free to skip this one, and I'll see you next week with the next history video. So, some of you may know that before I started doing all of this Hearthstone history stuff, if you look back on my channel, there are a couple of old Hearthstone speedruns, and it's something that I really enjoyed that I don't think gets much publicity within the Hearthstone scene. And it's a nice way that you can have a sort of different experience out of Hearthstone, at least that's what I think. So today I'm going to be trying to give you a guide through how to do a speedrun of Knights of the Frozen Throne within Hearthstone, the solo adventure. All of the decks that I'm using in this run I got from Mifa's run, which I found on speedrun.com. I'll link his channel down in the description alongside the deck codes for all of these decks. I'm not saying that these are going to be the perfect decks, and obviously as more expansions come out, these decks aren't going to be the absolute best anymore, but you should be able to get a relatively decent time with these decks, and if not, compete for world record at the moment. I would recommend, if you're really trying to push the world record and you suspect that these decks are out of date, check in on the Hearthstone speedrunning Discord, which I will link below. Check speedrun.com for any new runs, which usually include deck lists in their descriptions. Deck trackers have just been allowed for Hearthstone speedruns, so I suspect that as the future goes on, people will start using deck trackers during their speedruns, so you should be able to see just from the video of the run what decks they're using and then try to adapt them to your own play within your speedrun. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll get on with it from here. First up, some basic speedrunning info. I'll have a link in the description below to download LiveSplit, which is a kind of basic speedrunning split program which you can set up to time how long you take on each segment of the adventure, so how long you take on each boss. It's useful for recording your overall time as well. Once you've done a couple more runs, you can also see how far ahead of your personal best you are, your best time, or how far behind you are as you're doing the run. And it's really useful for keeping track of that sort of stuff so that you don't have to do it yourself. Other than that, obviously you want to take your turns as fast as possible while you're doing a speedrun. One good tip: during the opponent's turn, you can click on the cards that the opponent plays, and that will cancel the playing animation of them. And it might not seem like much, but over the course of an entire run, it actually saves a lot of time. I want to talk as well about the mentality for speedrunning Hearthstone, because I think it's important that you're in the right kind of mind space when you do it. You will lose runs, obviously. In order to get a good time as well in a lot of Hearthstone speedrunning categories, you're going to have to take risks. Taking a lot of time to make the perfect play is all well and good, but it's usually better when you're starting out to just make a good play quickly. Obviously, over time, as you practice more, your good plays will become closer to the perfect plays as you gain sort of intuition for what cards you want to be trying to draw, what cards you want to keep, how you want to use those specific cards, and when you should be playing them. But when you're starting out, I would say don't worry too much about making the absolute perfect play. Just try and make a reasonably quick play that you think is good. And try not to get too frustrated when you lose runs, because sometimes you'll lose runs just to RNG. Hearthstone is a very RNG heavy game. Obviously there's the drawing of all of your cards, there's what cards the opponent draws as well, which is another layer of RNG, and sometimes you will just lose certain encounters or lose a run through no fault of your own. If you're someone who only wants to do sort of speedruns which are very consistent and where it's all within your power, whether you're going to get a good time or not, Hearthstone's probably not the speedrunning game for you. There's obviously a decent chunk of RNG, and getting the best time and improving your PB will involve quite a few attempts which will just end through no fault of your own, and you have to be willing to push on through those less than good attempts and make the best of good opportunities when they are presented to you during a run. So next up, I'm going to go through the decks for each individual boss and what you should be trying to keep in the mulligan and how you want to generally play out the deck through the game. Let's start off with the prologue. This one's pretty simple. It's a fight that's divided into two halves. Starting off, you'll be versus the Lich King as Jaina. It doesn't really matter what you get in the mulligan. You're not going to play any of the cards. You're just going to end your turn as quickly as possible and wait for the Lich King to kill you. Then it'll switch over to you being Frost Lich Jaina against Tyrion, and you need to use your hero power to kill minions as often as possible to try and set up a wide board with multiple water elementals and other cheap minions. For turn 6, on turn 6 you will always draw Anti-Magic Shell, which buffs your minions by +2/+2. If you've set up as many minions as you possibly can, usually the game will end on turn 6 when you play Anti-Magic Shell, or at worst on turn 7. With Lord Marrowgar, you want to mulligan for your key combo pieces, which are Inner Fire, Potion of Madness, Divine Spirit, and Vivid Nightmare. You can also consider keeping Silence or Shadow Visions. The game plan is to try and defend the board as best you can with the other minions that you have in your deck, while you're trying to draw the cards to get your combo. A lot of runs will end on this boss. It has very high RNG, and if you don't have your combo by the time he plays the 0/8 Bone Spike, you will probably lose the fight. The combo is to silence the Bone Spike, if Marrowgar plays it early, then get the Bone Spike with Potion of Madness, followed by either double Divine Spirit into Inner Fire, or Divine Spirit, Inner Fire, Vivid Nightmare, both of which give 32 damage and an OTK. The earliest this combo can be done is on turn 6, and you really want to be doing it then. Turn 7 at the absolute latest. For Saurfang, you want to mulligan for your cheap weapons, that's Cursed Blade and Woodcutter's Axe, as well as Corsair Cash, which helps you to draw your other weapons and close out the game. You can keep Heroic Strike if you already have a cheap weapon in hand, or you can keep more expensive weapons if you're worried about not having a weapon to play. The game plan is to push face as often as possible with the weapons, and only use the weapon charges to go face. Fight for the rest of the board with the other minions in the deck, and make sure that you don't die. I would only consider using a weapon on a minion if they either have Taunt, or if they are a Blood Beast, which is one of Saurfang's special minions that restores 3 health to him at the start of every turn. Next up is Lady Deathwhisper. You want to mulligan for a 1 or 0 cost heal 5 spell, either Circle of Healing, Flash Heal, or Binding Heal. Make sure that you can always heal 4 health on the dragon every turn. Heal the dragon to full and send it face every time. Lady Deathwhisper will never kill the dragon, so don't worry about defending it. It can only attack when it has full health, so you need to heal it to full every turn, and send it face 4 times in a row. For the final turn, you can silence the dragon for the last hit if you have to, but don't silence the dragon unless it is for the final hit that will end the fight. If you silence the dragon early, Deathwhisper will stop not attacking it, and she will kill it, which means that you've basically lost. Deathwhisper will also occasionally play taunts, so it can be helpful to save a silence effect to get through them and get that final hit in. For Blood Queen Lana'thel, you want to mulligan for cheap minions. You need multiple 1-cost minions in your opening hand, or ways to generate them on the board. The game plan is to set up as wide a board as possible. Lana'thel will give you a 0 mana hero power that buffs a minion by +2/+2, but you must use the hero power every turn, and you can only target each minion once. If you do not have a minion that you can use the hero power on, then you have to use it on one of her minions, and you obviously don't want this to happen. Set up as wide a board as you can and buff it up. You should be able to get a kill within a few turns using spells like Blessing of the Ancients, Mark of the Lotus, and Savage Roar. Professor Putricide is probably one of the more involved fights in this adventure, but it's relatively easy if you know what you're doing. You want to mulligan for Lawkeeper Polkelt or Hemet Jungle Hunter. Killing this boss normally would take far too long, as there are many phases to the fight and it would just go on forever, so using the Mechathune combo is best. This involves using Cataclysm to discard your hand and clear your board while Mechathon is on the board, which wins the game. Every other card in the deck is just to help you contest the board and draw cards until you can play this combo. Playing Polkelt will mean that you are certain to draw the rest of your combo pieces in the following turns. Play Hemet then to get rid of the rest of your deck, which is all cards that cost 3 or less, and keep a single 1 mana minion in your hand until turn 10. Make sure that on turn 10 the only minions in your hand are a single 1-cost minion, Mechathon and Shadowhunter Vol'jin. Play the 1-cost minion, use Vol'jin on it to swap it for Mechathon, then play Cataclysm and destroy your board, discard your hand, and win the game. For Sindragosa, you want to mulligan for cheap charge minions and cheap weapons. This fight is pretty similar to Saurfang in that you basically just want to send everything face as often as you can. The only added change is that at 20 HP and 10 HP, Sindragosa will freeze all of the minions on your board into ice blocks that you can't interact with. So if you're not careful, you're going to find yourself unable to play any more minions. Be aware of these HP breakpoints and try to have the board empty when you cross them if you can. But should worst come to worst, try to have only 1 minion on the board at most. If you lose all of the spots on your board to these ice blocks, you will lose the encounter. Last but definitely not least, we have the Lich King himself. You want to mulligan for anything except Serrated Tooth, Voodoo Doll, Anchor, or Mechathon. The Lich King is a relatively easy fight. If you're playing a rogue deck, he'll remove all spells from your deck on turn 1, which leaves you with just Serrated Tooth, Voodoo Doll, Anchor, and Mechathon in your deck. You can then draw the rest of your combo pieces over the next 4 turns and end the game by turn 6. Play Anchor on turn 5 to reduce Mechathon and Voodoo Doll to 1 mana. If the Anchor survives, play Voodoo Doll with Anchor as the target. If not, play Mechathon, then target it with the Voodoo Doll. Equip Serrated Tooth, and then break it with your hero power to give the Voodoo Doll and Mechathon rush. Send in the Voodoo Doll, and then Mechathon into enemy minions to win the game. Time is recorded when the Lich King's hero portrait starts to crack after you've played Mechathon. If you're considering crafting cards to make these decks that have been mentioned in this video, I'd probably hold off. You can substitute a lot of the cards in a lot of these decks and achieve fairly similar results. Have a look around online and see if there are any other decks which are similar, which maybe you do have the cards for. If you are going to craft some cards, I would probably craft the ones for the Lich King and the Putricide fight, the legendaries for those, as those strategies really make a big difference over playing the fight normally. There are other budget decks available online for those 2 encounters, so if you want to have a look around and try those out first, maybe give them a go, but they are much less consistent than the ones that are listed here. And with that, that's the end of the explanations. From here on, the rest of the video is just going to be a full run with my commentary. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different video. Once again, normal history videos will return next week. Let me know if you enjoyed this in the comments, and leave a like, maybe a subscribe if you really enjoyed it. Just trying to bring some attention to an aspect of the game that I think is really underappreciated and that I really enjoy. And with that, here is the commentary. So we're going to start off with the prologue. Time obviously starts as soon as you press play for the prologue. This is one of the longer fights on the run, but it's fairly easy and it's pretty much the same every time. You just have to do a lot of sit through a fair bit of dialogue, I'm afraid. But once you get past this bit, the run's fairly quick. You just want to keep your mulligan. It doesn't really matter what cards are in your hand. You're not going to play any of them anyway. You just want to keep passing turns and letting the Lich King kill you. So straight away you want to end turn, and then you want to click on the cards that he's playing to make them play faster. It's worth mentioning as well in this fight, before you start doing runs for the day, you probably want to load up this fight and concede, because if you don't, Jaina will speak during this fight, which will cost about an extra 30 seconds worth of time. So you definitely want to do that. And other than that, you just want to let the Lich King hit you until you're dead. Should be on around about turn 4. It's the same every time. So once you're on 4 health here, you know the Lich King's turn is over. You want to end your turn as quickly as possible so that he can finish you off and you can start the second phase of the fight. So here you just end turn, click on whatever he plays. Sometimes he plays Bolster, usually he plays Bolster. Not always though, I've had it bug out before. And then he'll finish you off. And then you want to wait for the second part of the fight. Clicking here doesn't do anything. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. You just have to wait, and you should be into the second phase of the fight at around about 2 minutes if you've done everything correctly. So you have to sit through a little bit of RP here and just wait. For some reason I always seem to disconnect when the Lich King switches over with Uther. I'm not really sure why. Not Uther, sorry, Tyrion. I'm not really sure why. If anyone knows, let me know in the comments, but I've patched the game, I've repaired my client, and it still does it every single time. So now that we're in there with Tyrion, he plays the same cards every single time. So you want to use your hero power on this guy, unless you have a mana worm, and you want to use your hero power to try and generate as many water elementals as you can and build up as wide a board as you possibly can. You want to do this because you will draw Anti-Magic Shell on turn 6 every single game, which buffs all your minions by +2/+2. So you just want to build up as wide a board as you possibly can using your hero power and playing cheap minions as much as you possibly can. So here I get a Mana Worm, but it's not really a great time to play it, so I don't play the Azure Drake. I'm probably not going to get in another hero power before I draw the shell here, which is kind of unlucky, but it just didn't get a great hand. It doesn't really matter though what you get. You just want to buff up as many minions as you can with this anti-magic shell, and usually you'll end this part of the run either on the turn you play anti-magic shell if you're really lucky, or most of the time the turn after, which is what happens here. So you deal final damage. I split as I deal the lethal damage to the whatever encounter I'm doing. You can do it however you want as long as you're consistent, and here you just have to wait until your hero portrait changes back to the normal Jaina portrait, and then you can click on and head on to the next encounter in the fight. You have to do the encounters in order for the speedrun, so you want to do Lord Marrowgar next. You're going to do this with a priest deck, and you're going to be trying to get an OTK off of one of his minions. I think it's called Bone Spike. So you want to mulligan for one of your combo pieces, which are Inner Fire, Potion of Madness, Divine Spirit, and Vivid Nightmare. You can also include Shadow Visions and one Silence card in your mulligan. Shadow Visions because you can exchange it for one of your combo pieces, and then Silence because you'll need to silence the Bone Spike, otherwise it's going to kill you. It does 15 damage, I think, if you don't silence it. So basically the game plan for this is to try and contest the board, keep yourself alive for as long as possible while you draw cards to try and get your combo. And that's basically it. You want to try and keep yourself as high health as possible while trying to gather the pieces of your combo. So I'm lucky, I've got quite a few in my hand here. A lot of runs will die on this boss. It's not the most consistent strategy ever. He plays a lot of small minions which can easily start to overwhelm you if you aren't lucky in the cards that you draw and if you don't draw the combo quick enough. Usually if you haven't performed the combo by sort of turn 6 or 7, you're probably going to lose the game. So you need to be trying to do this combo as quickly as possible, and don't feel bad if your run dies at this point. Many of my runs just die on this boss. It's probably the most difficult boss in terms of potential to kill the run. But you can see here I've gathered most of the combo pieces. Luckily I've got my Silence, my Potion of Madness, my Inner Fire, my Vivid Nightmares and my Divine Spirit. So now I'm just waiting for him to play the Bone Spike so that I can silence it and do the combo. Fortunately for me, he does play it, so it's up now 0-8. I can silence it, which I do. Potion of Madness to get it over to my side. I just drew another Divine Spirit, so I can double Divine Spirit and then Inner Fire. If I hadn't drawn that Divine Spirit, I would have to use Vivid Nightmares instead to make a second copy of the 1616 button spike. Next up is Deathbringer Saurfang, one of the easier fights in the adventure. Basically, you want to just try and get a fairly low-cost weapon in your starting hand and just push face damage as much as you possibly can. I'm unlucky here in that I get double Heroic Strike and Blade Storm. I would keep the double Heroic Strike if I had a weapon to go with it, but I don't, so I think I get rid of both of them. Heroic Strike doesn't work. You cannot just cast Heroic Strike and go face on Saurfang. You have to have a weapon equipped alongside the Heroic Strike, which is the reason why I mulligan it away. What you would want to keep in the mulligan would be things like Cursed Blade, Woodcutter's Axe, Corsair Cash, so that you can draw and get those weapon plays up quickly. I'm lucky enough to get a Corsair Cash in my opening, but it goes on the Cursed Blade. I usually don't play Cursed Blade unless it's on turn 1. There's just too much risk that before you run out the durability of the weapon, he's going to lethal you, basically. So if I draw it after turn 1, I tend to just leave the Cursed Blade. If you're really going for world record, probably you just want to play the Cursed Blade, and if he kills you, and that's the end of the run. But if you're just trying to become better at the speedrun, get a bit more of a consistent time going on, you probably want to leave the Cursed Blade, which is what I chose to do here. I've got an Arcanite Reaper in my hand though, so I still have a decent weapon to be using towards the late game to finish up this fight. And as you can see, he only has 20 health, so it's going to end fairly quickly once you start playing those bigger weapons and hitting him in the face. Unfortunately, he's played Saronite Chain Gang, so I've got to get through these taunts. That's the only time I would use a weapon on anything other than his face, is if he has taunts blocking you from hitting face. I managed to clean them all up, and then I can send the second charge of the Woodcutter's Axe face. I have an Arcanite Reaper ready, which is going to do 10 damage to face, so he's only got 8 left, and I'm in a pretty good spot here. So I think I play the Arcanite Reaper, and I also play the Doomsayer in case he plays another taunt to block on the next turn. The Doomsayer will just stop him from doing that. He crushes it, ends up not really mattering, he spent all of his mana, so it's fine. Fortunately, I draw the Heroic Strike, which means that I'm going to end the fight one turn earlier than I would have otherwise, because I get that extra 4 damage, and then I can just send the final attack face for a fairly easy encounter. He ends his turn, I just go face, and the game is over at that stage, and we can move on to the next boss. Next up is Lady Deathwhisper. She's one of the easiest fights in the entire adventure. You shouldn't really have any trouble here. Really, really consistent, and yeah, it's just really hard to not win this one. You want to mulligan for a decent low-cost healing effect, so either Circle of Healing, Binding Heal, Flash Heal, any of those will do, but you need one of them in your hand on turn 1. So that you can heal this dragon. All you want to do for the whole game is to heal this dragon and send it face. Deathwhisper will never kill it. Her hero power will always reduce it to 1 health, but she will never choose to kill it. So all you need to do is send this dragon face a total of 4 times. So I played the Flash Heal on turn 1 to heal it for 5. I have the Nephicet Ritualist ready for turn 2. Unfortunately, you can't skip this RP, but I played my Ritualist, heal the dragon to full health, send it face. Don't even bother attacking the face with any of your other minions, It's just a waste of time. I have here, I'm lucky enough to draw Circle of Healing, so I choose to use that. Send it face. You can silence the dragon, but if you silence it, Deathwhisper will choose to kill it. So try not to silence the dragon unless it's the very last hit. It's also worth keeping silence in case she plays a taunt, as she did here, and then you can get rid of that taunt and send the dragon face for a quick finish of this boss. Next up is Blood Queen Lana'thel. She is one of the harder bosses in the adventure, but not as bad as Marrowgar, nowhere near as bad. She can occasionally cause your run to die, but it's quite rare. All you want to do versus her is make sure that you always have minions on the board, so you want to set up as wide a board as possible. She's going to give you a hero power, which costs 0 mana and gives a minion +2/+2. The drawback is you have to use it every turn, so you always want to have a minion on board that you're able to use it on. You can only use it on each minion once, so you need to keep putting more minions on the board so that you don't have to buff her minions. If you start having to buff her minions, it's going to go downhill very quickly. So you can see now my hero power's changed. I can buff up my Raven, play 2 more minions, and just send everything face. You don't really need to fight for board in this encounter. You just send everything face. Her hero power deals 3 damage with lifesteal, so she's going to get rid of one of my minions. That's why I had to play 2, otherwise I would be a bit stuck here. But fortunately I have the Akaros Veteran on the board. I buff it up and you can see she's pretty much already dead. I can play the Savage Roar next turn for lethal and it's all over. I do unfortunately misplay here. I forget that the Savage Roar also provides damage to the face, so I play and buff this Raven when I didn't need to, so I lose a little bit of time there, but otherwise it would have been a fairly clean fight and a good closeout. Next up is Putricide. He's one of the longer encounters in the speedrun. The strategy is reasonably consistent if you know how to play it. It just takes a while to play it out. If you do this boss casually, you'll know that the fight is ridiculously long with loads of different phases. So what you want to do in the speedrun is get it over as quickly as possible by using the Mechathune combo. All you have in this deck is basically a lot of draw and board removal so that you can fight for the board until you get your combo, which is Shadowhunter Vol'jin, a 1 mana minion, and Mechathune, and Cataclysm, sorry. So your main goal is to get that combo into your hand, and the deck is set up to facilitate that. So you just want to keep drawing as many minions or as many cards as you can, in order to get that combo as quickly as you can. It's worth mentioning as well that because of how Shadowhunter Vol'jin works, you're going to swap a 1 mana minion on the board for Mechathune in your hand. And because the minion that gets swapped onto the board is random, Mechathune needs to be the only minion in your hand once you play Vol'jin on that 1 mana minion. So by the final turn, you want to have in your hand only one 1 mana minion, Mechathune, and Shadowhunter Vol'jin. Otherwise, you run the risk of getting the wrong minion picked off of Shadowhunter Vol'jin and losing the game. Which, as you can see, I make a bit of a misplay regarding that in this game. Fortunately though, I've drawn Lorekeeper Polkelt, which means that I know that once I play it this turn, my next 4 draws are going to be all of my combo pieces, and all I have to do between then and now is clean up my hand with all of these extra cards so that I only have 1 minion in hand to swap with. And that's what I'm going to do. So I draw my Mechathune, I can play my Doomsayer and just try and get rid of these cards out of my hand as much as I can. I choose not to attack with the Polkelt because it just wastes time to be attacking. I could have attacked there. It wouldn't really have mattered though, because the Doomsayer is going to clear the whole board up on the next turn anyway. Here I draw Hemet and I play him, which is I probably shouldn't have done. I probably should have played one of those 1 mana minions alongside him to try and empty out my hand, because you'll see it doesn't quite go as planned later on. I've drawn Vol'jin, there's only 1 card left. Here I should have definitely played Doomsayer and one of the depth charges, because now I'm left in a weird spot where the combo is 10 mana, but I am forced to use some of my mana on my first 10 mana turn to get rid of cards in my hand because I misplay into this ice trap here. And I end up with Hemet in my hand, which means that next turn I have to play Hemet. I have to hope that he survives so that I can use Shadowhunter Vol'jin on him because I've played my other 1-mana minions, so you've really got to be careful there. Fortunately for me though, Hemet does survive the turn, and I cling on with 1 HP and manage to close out this encounter. You'll see here I draw Fatigue for 2, not even close. Now I can play Shadowhunter Vol'jin, which swaps Mecha'thun onto the battlefield, and then Cataclysm, which discards the rest of my hand and kills Mecha'thun, meaning that I defeat Professor Putricide with the OTK combo, and the encounter is over. Last before the Lich King is Sindragosa. With this one, you just want to be conscious of how many minions you're playing on the board, because as she gets to 20 HP and then 10 HP, she will freeze all of the minions on your side of the board, making them into uninteractable minions, essentially. So you won't be able to play any more minions in those spaces, and you have to be really careful that you're not filling up the board too much, because you could end up in a state where you can't play any more minions, which obviously wouldn't be good. So for this fight, you're going to be heavily relying on charge minions and weapons. You want to mulligan for cheap charge minions and cheap weapons as much as you can. My mulligan isn't ideal here, but it's not terrible. I can play the Bluegill Warrior on 2, send it straight face, and then follow up with the Dragon Slayer, which can give a good board swing. So I send the Bluegill face, she plays another dragon, I can then play Dragon Slayer to get rid of that dragon, and I know that I can send that Dragon Slayer face a couple of times to get her down to 20 HP without risking putting too many minions on the board. You might ask in this next turn, why didn't I play Wolf Rider? Because if I played Wolf Rider, I would send the Dragon Slayer face, I would send the Wolf Rider face, and she would be left on 21 HP, which means that the next turn I would have to pick whether I wanted to send the Wolf Rider or the Dragon Slayer face, and the other one into the minion, otherwise I'm going to use up too many slots on the board. I could have played the Wolf Rider there, but I chose not to. Instead, now she's on 24 HP, which means that I can send the Dragon Slayer face one more time. I know that Sindragosa's can be on 20, which is great, and I can hit with the Arcanite Reaper for 5, putting her on 15, which means that I know next turn I can hit the Arcanite Reaper face again for 10 for the last freeze, and then I'm able to play minions freely. It also has the benefit of getting me lower health for Mortal Strike, so that my Mortal Strike can deal 6 damage, which happens once I'm below 12 HP. So here I play the Bluegill, because I know that this Doomsayer is going to clear the board, and then I can finish off with the Mortal Strike plus the Wolf Rider, the charging Wolf Rider, next turn. Although it is quite close. 1 HP, well, it happens. You can wipe on this boss if you're not careful. It's easy to let stuff get out of hand, but it goes fine this time. The final fight is of course the Lich King. We're going to be using a rogue deck to beat him because that's the most consistent by far. You can occasionally lose if you're really unlucky and he plays a really wide board of minions, but it's very rare. Usually this fight is fairly consistent and fairly quick if you're using a rogue deck. So the deck in question is all spells except for Serrated Tooth, Voodoo Doll, Anchor the Buried, and Mecha'thun. What the Lich King does if you're playing rogue is he gets rid of all spells in your hand and deck, which leaves you with just your combo pieces, all of which you will have drawn by turn 5. So you just skip the first turn straight away, wait for him to delete all of your deck basically except the combo, spend 4 turns to draw the combo, and then close out the game with the combo. So you can see he's just deleted my whole deck. I draw Anchor. The order in which you draw them doesn't really matter. It can be a bit inconvenient if you draw Serrated Tooth last, but it doesn't really matter. Draw Serrated Tooth, equip it whenever you want. You don't even have to attack with it, because you can equip your daggers to replace it later on, triggering the Death Rattle, so you don't need to attack with it. You can just pass all your turns until you've got your whole combo. He plays a couple of minions here. Fortunately, his board isn't going too wide, so there's very little chance that he's going to kill me here. This is probably a safe way to finish up the run. Plays the Saronite, it really doesn't matter. I've drawn my Mecha'thun. I'm going to play Anchor, and then I'll be able to perform the OTK next turn. So this reduces Voodoo Doll and Mecha'thun to 1. You want to make sure that your board is empty when Mecha'thun dies, so if Anchor had survived here, I would want to use Voodoo Doll on the Anchor, then play Mecha'thun, then break the Serrated Tooth to give all of my minions rush the Voodoo Doll in, which kills the Voodoo Doll and the Anchor, and then rush the Cthulhu in to finish it off. But fortunately he removes the Anchor, so it doesn't really matter. I just rush in the Voodoo Doll so that the board's going to be empty. Board's empty, Cthulhu dies, I kill the Lich King, and it's over. Time is on the first moment where you see the Lich King's hero portrait crack.
You did it, champion!
There must always be a Lich King.